We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill.
Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for?
Those masters of the universe are at it again.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy. I'm Todd Bensman, standing in for Mark Krikorian, Executive Director, the Center for Immigration Studies. Today we're going to be talking with Jaeson Jones, who is one of the leading students of the Mexican Cartels and probably the leading proponent in the nation of designating them foreign terrorist organizations. Now that that's accomplished, Donald Trump has declared them. I thought it'd be a good idea to bring Jaeson in to talk about, what next. Jaeson, welcome to the show, and we'll get started.
Todd, it's good to be with you, and thanks for having me today.
Sure. As I mentioned, you're probably one of the nation's leading students on the Mexican cartels from your years with Texas DPS, and also on the front line at the border and later in the agency's intelligence division. And for full disclosure, we did work together for years. I was with Texas DPS Intel as well, and you were my captain, one of my captains. You retired from DPS and crossed the police tape the other way and became a reporter for Newsmax on the border down there. And you took with you your abiding hatred of the cartels. Take us through how you got to that personal place with the cartels.
Sure, I had moved 9 times across the state of Texas, and as the cartels were evolving from organized crime, which is, prior to 2006, they truly were organized crime mafia. By 2006, going into 2007, the Calderon administration began leveraging their military to go after them. And this was really the evolution into an insurgency. And by 2010, we'd begun to see them go into terrorism. And then in 2015, into the world where we see them today as truly a parallel government. And I watched and worked and sent incredible men and women to that border to work these cartels and the impact that we were having on the state of Texas. And one of the incidents that really set with me and really hit it at another level was we had lost 49 migrants, had their heads chopped off, their arms chopped off, their legs chopped off in a stash house run by the Los Zetas. The following day, we rescued 54. All the awards say 52, but it was one operation I can talk about publicly where the others are classified. I'll never be able to talk about them. And Todd, I could have done that on average somewhere between 3 and 5 days a week, either rescues like that or going after cartel leadership. But the cowardice within the federal government was unprecedented. And seeing what they were evolving into, I went public. And if you'd have told me I'd have been a journalist, to be quite frank with you, I'd have never believed it. But it was all about one thing. It was getting the cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations and building out the architecture for full spectrum operations and obtaining authorities. That's what it was really all about at the end of the day.
So, yeah, I remember some of that, from being in the division with you. So you came out, and as far as I can tell, you were sort of leading the charge politically after your service to designate them as foreign terrorist organizations. When did it first occur to you that the U.S. needed to do that, to designate them as a foreign terrorist organization? I mean, that's normally reserved, as you know, for, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those kind of guys. Why did they have to be designated, in your opinion?
I have understood Fourth Amendment requirements very, very well as a narcotics agent. When you can and when you can't, take away someone's Fourth Amendment rights and go into their home. I mean, that is a big deal in our nation. And our system by design, and it's absolutely right, and you got to give the founding fathers a lot of credit for Fourth Amendment in the protection and security of our rights and our homes. But our system moves very slow, Todd. The problem is that Americans haven't been told this by most of these pundits. To develop mere suspicion, reasonable suspicion, and probable cause is a very long process under the investigative model. And it is exactly why when you fight transnational crime, you will never win, because it moves extremely rapidly. This is why for 50 years we lost the supposed drug war, and I hate that terminology. But it was very clear to me that the architecture with which we were taking on and working the cartels in Mexico and globally and domestically would never beat them. Didn't matter what we did. At one point, I remember reviewing our cases alone within our agency, and we had over 3,500 either active or former cases on the Mexican cartels. That was just one agency of over 2,600 in the state of Texas. The model was broken, and the hyper-violence we were seeing in Mexico was coming to the U.S. if we didn't make drastic changes very rapidly, very quickly. That the mass murders of 72 migrants in San Fernando, we worked that, if you remember it. The 300 men, women, and children of Allende that were killed, chopped into pieces, and burned to guiso.
I remember that one.
That was another major one, because the cartels have a saying that you can't count a body that doesn't exist. And then, I could go on, but those are just examples of that was coming here if we didn't take direct action.
You mentioned model and architecture. Give for folks that aren't in the middle of that, what does that mean? What's architecture? What's the model that was not working?
We had to get away of Fourth Amendment operations outside the United States. When will the lesson be learned by the failed Department of Justice? And let me walk you through this. Prior to 9/11, we had the first World Trade Center attack in New York City. And what did we do to Middle East terrorist organizations? We fired a couple Tomahawk missiles under the Clinton administration, and we began using the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces to go after them. And then what did that bring us? 9/11. And I always wondered what it must have been like to be the CIA's agents who knew that these radical Middle Easterners were coming for the U.S. and that we had better take action. And they were screaming at their leadership as loud as they could. I saw the same thing happening with the cartels, and it was their evolution was so rampant, so violent that it was coming here. And we were seeing it here, Todd. So the whole architecture piece was about building success to local, state, federal, DOD, the Department of Defense, and all U.S. intelligence agencies to use full spectrum authorities within all tools of national power to go after these cartels. And that's exactly what the FTO designation, or Foreign Terrorism Organization designation, gives us now. And thanks to President Trump, we've got it.
Well, before we get to all that, take us through a little bit, what, because I remember you were probably the loudest voice calling for that. There were others, of course, but you were just relentless for years. What was your role in pressing for an FTO designation? And also, what did you do to get it done? And why did it take so long for anyone to finally listen to you? It's been years since you've been 8 years, maybe.
Yeah, I retired in 2016 and went public immediately, and nobody would listen to me. I didn't have the title of director, commissioner, police chief. I was a captain who was running operations, and that's what captains do. But I had to figure out a way to reach the public in mass, and so I began just speaking on it as much as I could. And finally, I got a break with Lou Dobbs and Lara Logan. Those two journalists listened to me, and that was the game-changing moment. And I went through this evolution, learning how to speak publicly, because I had no idea. I'd come from the clandestine services, and just started taking journalists to the border and showing it to them, because I had this belief that if I illuminated it, I could eliminate it. That if the American people could just see what we were seeing on the border, no one would be okay with that. And that was actually true. We turned the tide with that by illuminating cartel videos, the horrible atrocities. We did that over 8 years. it really went through several evolutions. First, people had no idea what the cartels were doing, so we proved that. Then there was this belief as we had mass migration happening that, my God, if we designated them as terrorists, then people from Mexico would be able to claim asylum. So we can't do it because of that. Then later, it evolved into, look, Mexico's our number one and number two trading partner in the world. This would damage trade. And it just evolved in all these different things. But I will tell you, if you would have told me that our nation was so broken that it would have allowed the deaths of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children as the cartels began to weaponize fentanyl, parafentanyl, serafentanyl, xylazine, netazine, and that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Mexican citizens would have been able to not only be brutally killed in ways that, I can't even articulate on here because you probably won't even be able to talk about it, and that a country could be overrun, not on the other side of the world, but just at our border. I would have never believed it. And what I realized at the end is it had become a political football. And I'll be very frank with you, both Republicans and Democrats were against it in Congress. And if it had not, and I'll just give the man credit, if it had not been for President Trump, just being completely frank here, we would still not have the terrorism designation as we stand talking. And by the way, most major think tanks never jumped on board with this, just so you know. They never did. And a lot of it had to do with the immigration part behind it.
So it sounds like it was fentanyl just finally pushed it over the political cliff.
I believe that it was what the people were going through that was completely missed. It didn't matter who I talked to. You know what they never said to me?
What?
They never said, what about the folks, Jason? They always gave me a PhD analytical view, and they forgot the people they serve across the board, even in news, and in media, to be quite frank. It was always some analytical, some rule of law, some relationship with the Mexicans it would damage. It was never about our citizens. And that's where I knew we were right and they were wrong. And we got it. And I will tell you, till the day I die, I will never understand how our government became so broken that this would be allowed.
You must be feeling pretty good these days after all this time, and looks like Trump has done it. Before we get to the guts of that, how are you feeling?
I will tell you, it's been a 7-day operation nonstop. As you know, I don't take off weekends. I have worked through. I've been in shock, if I'm being very frank with you. Folks that are listening need to understand this will save hundreds of thousands of lives over the next decade in our country alone. Globally, this will save millions. Remember, I was just with the DEA special agent in charge in New York City with Frank Tarantino, and publicly he admitted that the Mexican cartels are now in 65 countries around the world.
Wow.
This has not been a U.S.-Mexico problem for decades. The problem is that the American people haven't been told by our government. And so when I tell you that the impact of this will be unprecedented in the saving of lives, I truly, truly mean it, as these cartels not only weaponized fentanyl, began killing their own citizens at unparalleled numbers and, impacting their operations all over the world.
Yeah, because foreign terrorist organization designation allows the United States to employ state tools internationally, and not just in one country, but anywhere in the world. So let's go into it. So Trump's designated, I think 6 of the cartels as FTO. And he also, the context is that he often openly declares that he is going to totally destroy them and wipe them off the face of the earth and that sort of thing. And Tom Homan, the border czar, also talks like that. But let's get down to brass tacks about that. What is the designation of these? It's 6 of them, right? And what does that mean? What can the administration do now that's different than what prior administrations have done toward the cartels?
Sure. So right now there are 6 cartels designated, which is Sinaloa, Cartel Jalisco New Generation. Sinaloa is the largest. CJ&G is the most hyper-violent. Then you have La Familia Michoacana down in the Michoacan area. You have Cartel del Noreste, formerly known as the Los Zetas, who you and I worked for many, many years. And then you have Cartel del Noreste, and then you have Cartel Unidos, which is the unified cartels in the central part of Mexico. That makes up pretty much most of them. I will tell you the Beltran Leyva organization and La Línea are missing along with the Tijuana cartels. But I do think that the State Department will bring them into the fold eventually. You also have, and this is brilliant on the policy side of it, MS-13 along with Tren de Aragua.
Yeah, that's right.
Which are transnational. They are not cartels, but they are transnational criminal organizations. And it's a brilliant policy, what they have followed the executive order up with, which is total elimination. I want to say that again because it's very, very important. The total elimination policy coming from the White House is a 50-plus year change from the disruption and dismantling framework of the Department of Justice. And what it truly allows for is full spectrum operations from A to Z that our government has the ability to employ from all branches of government. And that truly will allow us to go after these dark networks and go after them based on how the network is designed. Because how you go after the Zetas is going to be different how you go after Sinaloa, and different how you go after Cartel Jalisco New Generation, because some are mesh, some are wheels, some are different type of network structures. And based on that, it allows us to truly go after them rather than through a law enforcement DOJ model that we've been stuck with, having to build out what I talked to you about earlier, the mere suspicion, the reasonable suspicion, and the probable cause.
That's the architecture.
That's right. There you go. Now you understand the mindset of where I was from a law enforcement model, understanding how to build success into the architecture through authorities. And that's exactly what we've achieved.
So, like tactically, what can Americans expect to see that's different than what they've been doing, what we've been doing as a country? And I mean, what's that? What other tools are there? I mean, give us some specifics about what the U.S. is going to start doing, what we can expect to see from the U.S. toward the cartels globally. I mean, what are we going to do?
Yeah, sure. Let's look at some of what you're seeing happen right now. First, you're seeing high-flying aircraft already in the intelligence collection process from the United States flying over the country of Mexico through agreements. See, that right there is a start that we didn't have prior because the U-2 spy plane doesn't support U.S. law enforcement operations. Do you see what I'm getting at? So that aircraft, along with Poseidon, signals intelligence collection aircraft collecting the cartels' phone data, along with their radio communications, which, by the way, Americans aren't even aware that their capabilities with radios, you can sit on a beach in Thailand and run operations all over the world through multiple levels of encryption. It allows us to finally collect on that at all levels and then be able to go kinetic if we have to, which is not the vision, just so you know, all the way down to, running ads and campaigns, trying to change the hearts and minds of people all over the world, wherever these cartels operate. So when you hear me say full spectrum operations, this is not, I want to be very clear, about going and starting a war with Mexico and killing a bunch of Mexican citizens and damaging the sovereignty of Mexico. That is not what this is about in any way, shape, or form. It is about obtaining the authorities needed, building out the structure and architecture to allow every capability of our government to work and work in sync with the Mexican government. And I'm one of the people who have done that, where you build a relationship with the Mexican Marines, with Sedanis generals, and you send them intelligence packages and they run on those. What we have had a problem with is getting the Mexican government, due to corruption, to go after these targets that we have in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is going to fix that through not only the policy, but also through the fact that we've now got this new authorities, which is just incredible, Todd. I still am not fully wrapped my mind around what's happening.
Take us through another couple of authorities. I mean, like, how do we get at their money? You mentioned the spy flights, which are way, way up. They've hiked those. Those are far more numerous than they've been in the past.
100%. So there are three major wins you get immediately that most Americans haven't been told about. And that is, first, you can't be a terrorist in the United States. If you are here in the United States and you're supporting cartel operations, that's material support. The second part of this is that we have tens of thousands of them here. So we need speed in our system. And domestically, we'll always use Fourth Amendment. So many of them are here. Remember, they have money. They're here on visas. So this allows us to revoke those visas, send them through a quick process of deportation and get them out of our country. I don't have to work a 2-year case on a drug case while they're sending in poison to try to get them arrested, thrown in jail, then get them deported after they serve time here. We'll never win there. The second part to that is it allows us to put them on no-fly lists all over the world. So we're limiting their mobility globally because you can't be a terrorist flying on airlines.
Right.
The third part to this, that's the big win, and you always hear about it, is the money. Well, Jay, we need to go after the money. Well, to the folks listening, and to the pundits who have been saying this on television but never had to conduct an investigation in their entire careers, no shit. We have been doing that for over 20 years, but what Americans were never told, Todd, is how long it takes to go from mere suspicion to probable cause and to build that out under the investigative model domestically. And that's why their money moves so rapidly, so quickly. By the time you've worked a 1 to 2 year investigation to go after their money, they've moved it to 52 different banks and it's already invested and washed and gone. And no one would ever tell the American people this. So now this is going to allow us to go after their assets real time, their money real time, just as we do regular terrorists all over the world. And that's where the big wins are. Now, domestically, I want to be very clear here. We will always use Fourth Amendment in this country. We're not getting away from that. You can't. But outside our country where we're fighting these terrorists, we have all those capabilities that we didn't have before in the toolbox. And those are big wins for your listeners, big wins for our law enforcement to be able to win. And again, building the architecture for success.
I'm always wondering in the discussion about this, like which U.S. agencies are going to do this work? Does anybody know? Is that laid out yet?
All of them. There will be no one agency. This is a whole of government approach. And depending upon what part of the world you're operating in, depending upon where in the United States you're operating, it may be, a small sheriff's department already has the lead on that investigation domestically. And then you can bring in the feds to help them if need be, or working with Europol. Well, it'll be working with our host nations over there to go after them there. I mean, this is where I truly say we have full spectrum operations and capabilities.
I mean, does this give us the authority to, when we do a drone strike on an Al-Qaeda guy overseas, can we do a drone strike on somebody in Mexico because of this?
Absolutely. If the Mexican government or the host nation doesn't want to, do we have the authorities? The answer is yes, we do. Do I see it coming to that? Man, I sure hope that that's not where it has to go, because this is about building a relationship with the Mexican counterparts. And we're in a really new position. And that position is we're in an interesting place. We really are. I've never seen it like this. We have a new administration in Mexico. We have a new administration in the United States with no background baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Two administrations that can come together and start rebuilding what we had, because Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador destroyed the relationships we had before, absolutely severed them. And all the things that we used to be able to do, that's not possible anymore. So all those channels and building of trust have to be remanufactured, Todd. They just don't exist. Those partnerships don't exist that we knew when we were working.
You mentioned material support. Most people probably don't know what you're referring to. It's a statute, federal, that you can prosecute for working with a designated terrorist organization, helping them in any way. How important is the use of that material support to this whole thing?
Well, domestically, through the investigative model, it's another tool in the toolbox they didn't have before. So we will see how much it's really utilized domestically. But again, I'll go back to it is one more tool that we needed that we didn't have before. The big wins that we're going to have here are what I talked about earlier, and that's going to be overseas operations and operations in Mexico and in Central and South America, where the hub of what we call the company is. It's not about going after all these people that you've seen chopping people's faces off. Even the cartel bosses call them the rats. That's the enforcement wing. The big wins that the nation will have here is when we truly go after the network that makes it work, the money side of it. the accounting side of it, the lawyer side of it, the corrupt government side of it. That's where the machine is, and that's where the big wins will be. And we now have the authorities to do it.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about the company before. The company being, the lawyers, the accountants, the bankers, the echelon, the top echelon that makes these organizations run internationally. You're saying that the FTO designation will allow a retargeting from the, as you call it, just the rats, the rank who are easily replaced, to those who are not so easily replaced that just could wipe them out. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. They are the true engine behind the cartels. And if you looked for them on a drug trafficking organizational chart, you would never see them because they're not the ones moving the drugs. Do you see where the disconnect has been? This is why for 50 years we've been chasing the wrong nodes within these dark networks. This will allow us full spectrum operations with the full level of national power and the architecture to go after the right cells for the first time.
Those are the suits. And aren't a lot of them in Mexican government?
Well, they are. Yes, that's very true.
Well, that's going to be interesting to see how the Mexicans go after their own like that. There is a 25% trade tariff on the table that could send the Mexican economy into a recession pretty quickly.
At the end of the day, though, I don't care what it sends to anything. I care about what it has done to the mothers and fathers who I've sat with across this country, who have lost the person they love the most in the world, their son, their daughter, their sister, their brother, their father, their mother, and they are forgotten, Todd. And I mean that. I have been with families all over this country who lost children to a pill they didn't know what they were taking because it was a clone pill. I've listened to a mother who lost her not even 2-year-old son who was just crawling on the carpet of the floor, but because there had been fentanyl in the carpet, and what do babies do? They put their little hands in their mouths. Watched her cry so deeply that I don't even have the ability to articulate it. And I can go on. And I've been the man that walks to your door, knocks on it, fixes my uniform as best as I can, and tells you the person you love the most in the world is never coming home. And to those families, that's exactly why we did this. And I don't care who in the federal government, the state government, the local government in Mexico likes it or doesn't like it. These families didn't deserve what happened to them. And this is exactly why we've done what we've done. And there is a reckoning coming for these cartels for what they have done to hurt so many people, not only in the United States, not only in Mexico, but around the world. And I hope there is iron in my words that is being heard right now, because I have truly mean it to the core of who I am.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I got that. Well, let me switch over to something. So, the Calderon war against the cartels from 2006 to 2012 didn't really work. I'd say they lost that war. Why is this one going to win? Why can we win this one?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. That strategy was going after the capos. And the reason for that has to do with the fact is we leveraged law enforcement model to do it. Yes, we pushed intel to Mexico. That's absolutely true. I worked both of that extensively, both within Calderon and Nieto. And they went after the cartel bosses. And it's actually known today as the capo strategy. But what was not allowed to be used was the U.S. military, U.S. intelligence agencies' full capabilities. What it was very limited model going after certain groups. And the cells that I'm talking about is what was never allowed to go after. And that's because the government really did not take them on. And we were looking at, again, drug traffickers and going after the capos based on what we had in our system instead of going after the right targets. And that's what's going to be different about that now.
Okay, one last question, if I can sneak it in. How are we going to actually stop fentanyl smuggling? How is that going to get done?
It is much bigger than going after just labs alone. You are told all the time that it's about China, 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 and the chemical precursors. That is absolutely false. They have already evolved around China to Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. That's why the total elimination policy is absolutely right here. you have to not only attack the labs, but you have to go after chemical precursors coming into Mexico. And I won't go into much depth here, but what I will tell you is that those relationships with China are truly forged within some of these cartels. So we need to go after those key nodes that bring in the chemical precursors and set those things up. The level of corruption is tremendous in Mexico, and it's allowed for a lot of this. So this will be a much heavier pull than a lot of people realize, but it is absolutely fixable. The Mexican government can do most of the heavy lifting, and they have the ability to win against these cartels. The problem, though, is that they've not been allowed to historically.
Okay, Jason, thanks for joining us, and tell us how to find your work.
Sure, I'm on Newsmax every day, or you can find me at jasonjones.com. That's JAESON Jones.com. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, buddy. All right, guys, take care. Bye-bye.
And finally, I have a few thoughts about the trade-off that Mexico and the United States negotiated as part of a recent deal to have the Mexican military deploy 10,000 extra troops along our border. There was a concession that a lot of people don't know about by the United States, by the Trump administration, to help interdict the flow of southbound guns from American retail stores that are said to be arming and equipping the cartels. This has been a long-standing claim by the Mexican government, a point of contention that really it's the United States that is contributing to its own fentanyl overdose catastrophe by not doing more to stop U.S. gun store retailers from selling guns that end up in cartel hands. And I recently wrote a piece for the American Mind, which is a Claremont Institute publication, laying out the argument that the cartels do indeed receive weapons sort of bought illegally from American gun stores, AR-15s and military-style semi-automatics, pistols, and lots of ammunition. That's true, and it's been true for a long time. It's still true today. But what is never mentioned in any of this is that the Mexican cartels have found sources of much higher caliber military-grade weaponry that they've equipped themselves with over the last 10 to 15 years. Much of that is coming from Mexico's own military stocks that they purchase from the United States and from abroad. And I mean big stuff like fully automatic 50 caliber machine guns and 30 caliber machine guns that you can't possibly buy at a US gun store. Not to mention Claymore mines and shoulder fired rocket propelled grenades that are capable of taking out aircraft and have taken down aircraft. A lot of the material, war material, I'll call it, that they are equipping themselves with is coming not just from Mexican stockpiles, from corrupt military officials who are just selling it to the cartels, but also from Central American stockpiles, older material that they purchased in the 80s, 90s, 2000s that works perfectly well. It's very lethal, and they have that. That's the material that you see them fighting with. You see tracers at night firing at one another. You see and hear sometimes from Texas the sound of 40 millimeter rounds being fired from grenade launchers, kind of rifle style grenade launchers that the cartels are very well equipped with. And none of that is ever entered into the narrative about how the cartels are arming themselves. So you're going to hear a lot more about this issue as the American-Mexican bilateral agreement moves forward on these cartels and the FTO designations, especially if there are gun battles and fighting and dead. It's not going to be strictly a U.S. gun store issue. That's not the full picture. I just wanted to point that out. And also my piece in the American Mind, which you can find at CIS.org or the American Mind. This is Todd Bensman finally signing off, and Mark Krikorian will be back next week.